Hello there. Is there no fence upon which Sir Keir Starmer has not perched and gathered splinters from? Firstly, don't forget to check out the latest from Richard's Missed the News channel, link in the descriptions box below. The RMT union is now vigorously shaking the rail strike fence that the Labour leader Keir Starmer has climbed onto to see which side he falls off on. Starmer has been doing all he can to keep the Labour Party neutral and outside of an industrial action which a few decades ago they would have been ploughing everything into so as to cause a general strike to bring the Tory government down. But despite Starmer's best efforts, his MPs are disobeying orders and turning out in support of the RMT union rail strike. The wheels are coming off of Starmer's party leadership wagon, with the General Secretary of Labour Funding Unite saying, "To instruct Labour MPs not to be on picket lines with workers speaks volumes. You don't lead by hiding. No one respects that. It's time to decide whose side you are on, workers or bad bosses." And the RMT boss, Mick Lynch, is demanding coordinated strikes in every town, levelling up the misery, as it were. While the Tories have decided to take the strikers are nasty people line, and that all workers must be modest in their pay expectations. And the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Simon Clarke, has been tasked with putting the government line out there, talking about the need for collective society-wide discipline over pay demands. But how do you stop people wanting to get ahead of a 9% or even higher level of inflation? How do you convince them that taking an effective pay cut is maybe bad for them individually, but in the interests of the UK as a whole, for the greater good, as it were? How do you explain to them that some people sitting at home for months on end on furlough during a pandemic, something that was supposedly done for the greater good, now has to be paid for by everyone? And that means some level of sacrifice by all for the greater good. Although some people will point out that we never really recovered from the credit crunch, so we're paying for that as well. And that we are now also paying to put the military-industrial complex back on a long-term Cold War footing in Europe, together with funding a hot war situation in Ukraine. Then there's the suspicion that governments around the world are quite happy with a hefty dose of inflation at the moment because it inflates their government debt away. And to do all that effectively, the government needs to talk tough but wring its hands and say there's nothing they can do, and then let the workers compete among themselves to see whose union can get them the biggest pay rise. While at the same time, the independent Bank of England would have to sit on its hands on raising interest rates for a while, staying well behind the inflation power curve. But of course none of that goes on in the UK, does it? No, the government is just asking us to show restraint for the greater good. But this restraint message comes from a party with Rishi Richlis Sunak as Chancellor, and their claims of building a high-wage economy, something that is now biting them in the rear. But right or wrong, at least the Tories have taken a stance. But it seems that Starmer prefers fence splinters in his nether regions as opposed to making decisions. And his chief whip, Alan Campbell, seems no better. According to Politics Home, he's not going to decide what to do with rebel Labour ministers who break the no-strike supporting edict until after Saturday. Is he hoping that everyone will have forgotten by then or something? However, you do get the impression that Starmer is not in favour of strikes, as it affects other Labour working voters as well. Workers who may now miss out on pay due to strikes. And commuter anger is clear from day one of this strike. Then there's all those cancelled hospital procedures and the like. Children not getting to school or being unable to take their exams. Cancelled social events and the impact on small businesses. And supporting strikes while claiming that Labour is now the party of business is not a good look. But I suppose the militants in Labour believe that all workers should be striking together to bring the hated Tory rule to an end. And those workers that don't support it are obviously Tory voters and therefore not worth bothering about. Starmer will also realise that by not directly supporting the strikes, he's put himself in the leadership challenge firing line to be replaced by a Marxist. Anyway, the message I take away from all of this is that when workers are forced out of their own personal transport, then they are beholden to whoever controls the public transport they use, whether it be unions or owners. So look forward to more of this as we are forced out of our fossil-fuelled cars and cannot afford an electric replacement vehicle. And don't for a moment believe that driverless trains and buses will help you. Firstly, because those trains still need to have trained drivers on board, just in case, and because some faceless person somewhere has to maintain and update the system regularly to keep the whole thing flowing. Someone has to punch in the details of roadworks for driverless buses, for example. Someone will still have to maintain the underground tunnels, the train's brakes, and the complex control system that stops driverless trains smashing into each other, etc. And although some people think that gremlins must be operating the ticket machines, it's actually humans that keep them running. Can you imagine what would happen if someone didn't put the little blank tickets in the machines when they run low? There will always be someone who can make your life a misery for their own gain, whether that gain be justified or not. But on the brighter side of modernisation and mechanisation is that modernising and becoming more efficient and productive benefits workers if it's handled correctly. It was John Boot of Boots the Chemist that pioneered that concept in the 1930s, where people were expected to work Monday to Friday and Saturday mornings. John Boot started a new factory that was so efficient it produced too much stock. Now, normal practice back then was that staff would then be immediately laid off. But John Boot told his 5,000 workers that no one would be laid off. They'd get Saturdays off and still get the same pay. The benefits of this to both workers and company is now well documented. But when looking at today's bosses like P&O Ferries, for example, you do wonder if they are of the same calibre as the forward thinkers of yesteryear. Now, one little point. Under the RMT's own trade dispute rules, according to Rule 8, all those in receipt of strike benefit will have to report to their branch in person once a week to get it, unless they have a good reason not to attend, a reason that is acceptable to the union, when the dosh would then be sent out. But some of them might have a long walk if the local transport is clogged up or not running. So will they be sending an email saying that they can't get there because of their own strike? While Keir Starmer looks forlornly for the political tweezers to pluck the fence splinters from his sore derriere.